6 other families. That's how many I found once I started looking. 6 families in the same county, robbed the same way, by the same man, and my 67-year-old mother was just the latest name on his list. My mother's name is Helen. She raised me and my brother alone after our father left when I was 9, working double shifts at a textile plant until her knees gave out and she took early retirement. She lives in the same house she bought in 1994, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a kitchen that still had its original laminate countertops and a stove she'd been nursing along for a decade. When she finally decided to renovate that kitchen, it was the first time in her adult life she'd spent money on something purely for herself. She'd saved carefully, a little from each Social Security check, a little from the part-time bookkeeping she still did for her church. $5,000. Not a fortune to most people, a fortune to her. She found the contractor through a recommendation at her hair salon. His name was Craig Weber, and the women there said he'd done beautiful work for someone's daughter. He came to the house, took measurements, complimented her garden, told her she reminded him of his own mother. He had a firm handshake and a company polo shirt with an embroidered logo. He gave her a written estimate and explained that he'd need the full deposit up front because materials had gotten so expensive. Mom called me that evening, excited. She said, he seemed like a real gentleman. The first 2 days, Craig and a younger man showed up early. They tore out the old countertops, removed the cabinet doors, laid plastic sheeting over everything. My mother was thrilled. She took photos of the exposed walls and sent them to me with little captions about how she couldn't wait to see it finished. On the 3rd day, Craig came alone. He installed a single row of new cabinet fronts along the back wall, ones that looked good enough in photographs but were hollow laminate facades screwed into drywall, with no reinforcing. He told my mother there was a delay with the countertop supplier and that he'd be back Monday. She made him a sandwich before he left. Monday came and went. She called his phone, it rang to voicemail. She left a kind message, said she understood delays happen. By Wednesday, she tried again. The number was disconnected. She drove to the address on his business card, a mailbox rental store in a strip mall. There was no office, there was no shop. She sat in her car in that parking lot for 20 minutes, and when she called me that evening, her voice was different. Not angry, smaller. She kept saying she should have known better, as if being trusting were something to be ashamed of. That's the part I can't forgive. Not the money, the way he made her feel stupid for believing him. I drove down that weekend to see the kitchen for myself. It was worse than I'd imagined. The demolition he'd done was real enough, which meant my mother was now living with a half-gutted kitchen, no usable countertops, and cabinet facades that wobbled if you touched them. He'd left behind just enough visible work to make it look like a job in progress, enough that any casual observer might think he was coming back. But he wasn't coming back. He'd taken $5,000 from a 67-year-old woman who made him a sandwich, and he was gone. I stood in that kitchen looking at the raw drywall and the cheap screws poking through hollow laminate, and something in my chest went very still. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I pulled out my phone and photographed everything. Every screw, every gap, every piece of plastic sheeting he'd left crumpled on the floor. My mother watched me from the doorway and asked if I wanted tea. I didn't file a complaint that week. I didn't call a lawyer. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table that Sunday night and I searched Craig Weber's name, his business name, his phone number, every variation I could think of. What I found changed everything. A post on a neighborhood Facebook group from 8 months earlier. A woman named Patrice describing almost the same scenario, different town, same county. Full deposit, 3 days of cosmetic work. Gone. 2 replies under her post mentioned similar experiences with a contractor, matching the description but using a slightly different business name. I screenshot everything. Then, I kept searching. Over the next 4 months, I found 6 other victims. 6 families Craig Weber had done this to, stretching back 2 years. He rotated business names. He worked off referrals from hair salons, churches, senior centers, anywhere he could find people who still trusted a handshake. His method was identical, every time. Show up for 2 or 3 days, do just enough visible work to muddy the waters legally, disappear. The amounts range from $3,000 to $8,000. Most of the victims were over 60. None of them had pursued it beyond a single police report, if that. They were embarrassed. They thought it was just them. I contacted every single one. Some were hesitant at first. Patrice cried on the phone when I told her there were others. A man named George, 74, told me he'd assumed his age was the reason he'd been fooled, that a younger person would have seen through it. I told him Craig targeted people specifically because they were decent, and that decency was not a character flaw. By the end of the second month, I had a folder on my laptop of signed statements from all 6 victims, photographs of unfinished work, copies of cashed checks, screenshots of disconnected phone numbers, and a timeline showing Craig's movements across the county. I also found something Craig probably thought nobody would ever connect. His girlfriend, Tanya, ran a small interior design Instagram account. She posted photos of kitchens and bathrooms, tasteful little before and afters. Some of those after photos featured materials that matched what victims described paying for but never receiving: granite slabs, custom cabinetry, high-end fixtures. Craig wasn't just stealing deposits, he was funneling the materials into side projects and flipping them for profit through Tanya's contacts. I documented that too. 4 months of work, and I hadn't made a single official move yet. That was about to change. In month 3, I brought my entire file to the county district attorney's office. Not the police department, where individual reports had gone to die. The DA. I requested a meeting with an assistant district attorney named Linda Chen, who handled fraud cases. And I came with a binder. 7 victims, consistent method, documented pattern, financial records showing material diversion. I watched Linda's face change as she turned the pages. She asked me how long I'd spent on this. I told her. She said most people file a complaint and move on. I told her my mother made that man a sandwich. Linda assigned an investigator. Within 3 weeks, they'd confirmed everything in my file and found 2 additional victims I'd missed. 9 total. The pattern was airtight. Craig had been operating just below the threshold that triggered serious attention, moving between jurisdictions, keeping amounts small enough that no single case looked worth prosecuting. But 9 cases together, exposed as a coordinated scheme, crossed the line into felony territory. I also filed a complaint with the state contractor licensing board. Craig, it turned out, had let his license lapse 18 months earlier. Every job he'd done since was unlicensed work, which was the separate violation. I filed that complaint with the documentation to prove it. In month 4, I did one more thing. I contacted the local television station's consumer protection segment. I gave them the broad strokes, no names of victims yet, just the pattern and the fact that a prosecution was coming. They were interested, very interested. I told them I'd give them the full story once charges were filed, and not a day before. I wanted the legal system to do its work first, but I also wanted Craig to understand, when the time came, that this would not be quiet. The DA's office filed 9 counts of fraud and 3 counts of unlicensed contracting against Craig Weber on a Tuesday in October. He was arrested at Tanya's apartment, which was a detail I allowed myself to enjoy. The television segment aired the following week. They interviewed 3 of the victims, including Patrice, who held up her folder of documents on camera with hands that barely shook. George declined to appear on screen but gave a written statement they read aloud. The reporter used the phrase organized pattern of elder exploitation, and the story was picked up by 2 other local outlets. Craig's mugshot was everywhere. His attorney tried to negotiate the charges down to misdemeanors. The DA's office, armed with 9 consistent victim statements and a documented 2-year pattern, declined. Craig pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts of fraud as part of a deal that required full restitution to all 9 victims and 3 years of probation, with the stipulation that any violation would trigger the remaining counts. He was permanently barred from holding a contractor license in the state. The state licensing board issued a public notice with his name, his photograph, and the words fraudulent practice. Tanya deleted her Instagram account the day after the news segment aired. I know because I checked. It took 5 months for the restitution checks to arrive. My mother received hers on a Wednesday. She called me and said it felt like more than money. She said she felt like someone had believed her. I sat on the other end of that call and pressed my hand flat against the table because I didn't trust my voice. She used part of the money to hire a licensed contractor, a woman named Maria, who came with references I personally verified, and Maria finished the kitchen in 2 weeks. It's beautiful. White countertops, soft gray cabinets, new hardware that catches the light. My mother sends me photos of meals she's cooked in it, still with little captions, and I save everyone. I don't feel triumphant. People ask me that sometimes, when I tell this story, whether it felt good. Parts of it did. Watching Patrice hold up her folder on television felt good. Hearing George say he didn't feel foolish anymore felt good. But mostly what I feel is tired and something harder to name. A kind of cold clarity that settled into me during those 4 months and hasn't fully left. I learned that I am capable of being very patient and very precise when someone hurts my mother, and I'm not sure that knowledge is entirely comfortable. Mom's kitchen has a window above the new sink that looks out over her garden. She stands there every morning with her coffee. She doesn't talk about Craig anymore.